share some of his experiences when he was in the United States House of Representatives, starting under President Gerald Ford in 1973 through 2003 under the presidency of George W. Bush. John lived in Kenmore and represented the citizens of Kenmore, Tonawanda, surrounding areas, and into Niagara County. Some of you probably were his constituents, and lo and behold, we met Sue Bolger this morning, who was one of John's constituents. Before his time in the United States Congress, John served single terms in the New York State Assembly and in the New York State Senate. So he has been a representative of the people for a long time. John's wife, Pat, is also here with him this morning. I know you will enjoy hearing about the 6 presidents that John worked under. Let's welcome him.
Yep. Well, I don't get around the way I used to, as you can see. But I guess none of us do. Thanks, Judy. Well, I want to thank Judy Wiedemann for inviting me here.
John, can you put it up here?
All right, I'll do that. Thank you. Judy was kind enough to invite me, and I'm delighted to be with you. I think I spoke here once before,
Yes.
maybe a decade or so ago. But I've forgotten what I've said, and you have undoubtedly forgotten. Maybe it'll be similar, maybe it'll be totally different. I have the biggest idea. I was going to show you slides, each of the 6 presidents with me on different occasions, whether it was signing a bill or just meeting them. But you'll have to invite me back for that. We can't do that today for whatever reasons. But I'll do the best I can to talk about the 6 presidents and some of my experiences with them, or if not experiences with them, my thoughts about them. And we don't have slides. Had we had the slides, I would have waited for questions until the end of the presentation. But instead, if you have questions while I'm speaking, raise your hand and we'll try to answer them during the course of the discussion, okay? At any event, it was the year 1974, and many things were happening that year. But one of the things that was happening was that Spiro Agnew was dumped as the Vice President of the United States, and Gerald Ford was selected to be his President Nixon's Vice President. And then something happened to President Nixon along the way, and his choice to be Vice President became President of the United States, Gerald Ford. And that was a fortuitous thing for the United States, because Gerald Ford was not only very well respected, but he was very well liked. He had spent about 25 years in the House of Representatives and was the House Republican leader in the days when you did not have that much polarization between the 2 parties. And I suspect the Democrats liked him almost as much as the Republicans did. So when he became president, there was a wealth of good feeling. Now, I did not have a prior experience with President Ford. In 1975, I was in my very first year in the Congress. And I remember one of the first things that President Ford did was invite an extremely large incoming freshman class. As I recall, we had over 70 new members who had just been elected for the first time, and I was one of them. And President Ford invited all of us over to the White House, or more appropriately, into the backyard of the White House, the Rose Garden. And I remember we had a line to shake the president's hand. And I remember when I shook his hand, he said, "I'm going to try very hard, John, to work with the members of Congress, and I hope you'll try hard to work with me." Well, I was just wowed by that. Here's the President of the United States, and I was a lowly freshman member. He was asking me to work with him. Well, I better work with him if I possibly can. I had that obligation and felt that I should. And I think the other members of Congress probably felt the same way. They had been there a long time. They knew him as a colleague, or they were freshmen, and they were impressed that he was extending his hand to them as freshmen. And I think he was what the country needed at that time. We were going through the difficulties with President Nixon, shaking the confidence of the electorate in government itself. And all of a sudden, there's this steady figure. He sits tall in the saddle, firm feet on the ground. He used to be a football player at the University of Michigan, and he was an All-American. And he could have gone on to professional football, most individuals say, but he didn't. Instead, and people might say, "Oh, he was a football jock." Well, he then went to Yale Law School, and that's not bad. And he graduated from Yale Law School and went on from there. So I was very, very pleased with his presidency because he provided the stability that we needed at that time, especially what we had gone through with both Nixon and Agnew. He was pretty much beyond reproach. And then he ran for election on his own right in '76 and lost to the challenger. And you remember the challenger was the person who had served as governor of the state of Georgia, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was relatively new to the Washington scene. He really was not that familiar with the players, the procedures, et cetera, but he had a really good mind and a good heart, and he too wanted to work with Congress. I think he probably needed the Congress even more than Gerald Ford did because he was so new to Washington. I think he was probably one of the brightest presidents that I served with. A lot of intelligence. I remember he started inviting us over to the White House and not meeting with us one-on-one, but meeting with us with big groups. There'd be 100 at a time or 200 even. And then he'd stand in front of us and he'd say, "Okay, what questions do you have? What's on your mind?" He was not afraid to open himself up to any domestic or foreign policy question, no matter what it was. And he was conversant with it, so he could discuss it in detail, not just superficially. He had that type of mind and attention to detail. And there were so many personal experiences, too, that I had with President Carter. I remember October 1st, 1980. We had a press conference in Niagara Falls dealing with the Love Canal and Superfund legislation, and I was one of the original sponsors of the Superfund bill, that his administration was strongly supporting it. And so he came to Niagara Falls. We had a press conference together, and we flew back on Air Force One. And we had a great opportunity to chat on those occasions. And I remember, and I'll always remember, getting off of Air Force One with him at Andrews Air Force Base. And he got off ahead of me. I was right behind him and walking down, down the steps. We then went into the presidential helicopter at Andrews Air Force Base. And the presidential helicopter took us to the helicopter pad and the backyard of the White House. And I was looking out the helicopter and I could see a bunch of people near the helicopter pad, and I had no idea what that was for. And I quickly found out though, because as we got off the elevator, as his foot hit the first step, those 100 or so started singing, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday." And that's why I can remember that October 1st is President Carter's birthday. And that was, and there were so many other occasions that we were able to chat and talk together. I remember being over the White House with his wife, Rosalind, and her taking me over to this huge picture that is in the White House of Niagara Falls, and pointed it out and discussed it with me, and a great many of the other things too. Then he was defeated in his race for re-election in 1980 by Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan served 2 terms, so he was there for 8 years. And he was very, very different than, say, President Carter. President Carter sometimes would spend an awful lot of time talking about the problems we had, the difficulties we had. And it's necessary to do that. But President Reagan would always say, "It's morning in America. All is well with the world now, all with the United States now, and all will be well with the United States in the future." He picked the spirit of the American people up. President Carter had given a speech frequently referred to as the Malay speech, if you recall that. Yeah. Well, you would never hear President Reagan giving a speech like that. He always gave a speech that was going to be positive and upbeat. And that was the chief positive characteristic, as far as I was concerned, about President Reagan. He was not a master of detail. And I hate to say this, but I'm convinced that in his second term, dementia started to set in. Because I remember being over at the White House and tossing some questions at him. And even if he was at his best, he might have had some difficulty, but he was not at his best in his second term, which always makes me concerned about the age of candidates. Sorry to say that. I know that I'm nowhere near as good today as I was a half a dozen years ago or a dozen years ago. Not bad, but not nearly as good as I wish I were still. I'm concerned at the age of some of the likely candidates for presidency next time, whether it's Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket or Donald Trump on the Republican ticket. I assume you have a question.
Yes. How influential was Nancy Reagan on her husband?
I have no idea. Sorry. I've read a lot about it, you know, either very or almost none at all. I suspect it's somewhere in between.
Okay.
But I wouldn't put any money on that. Okay. Well, I think the best decision that Ronald Reagan made, maybe it wasn't so much his decision voluntarily as it was forced upon him by the politics of the time, but his selection of George H.W. Bush as his running mate. I was very high on President George H.W. Bush, both as president and as a person. He certainly had a tremendous amount of experience even before he was selected as vice president. He had been the head of the CIA, so he knew what was going on around the world, both what the rest of the body politic knew, but what very few individuals do, the most top secret information, well, you know, what was in his mind. He had been a political figure too. He was chairman of the Republican National Committee. Yeah, and so he brought a wealth of experience, first to the position of vice president, and then he served as vice president for 8 years, and that gave him a tremendous wealth of experience, readying him for the presidency itself. I remember him calling me up when he wanted my vote on a bill, and he says, "John," he says, "I'm hoping that you could be with me on this." He says, "I'm not sure that the position I'm taking is the right one, but I think it is. I'm taking this position because it's also the best advice that I'm getting from the best minds in the country." He says, "So I can see others thinking differently, but I hope you'll be able to stick with me." Well, that's a very, very compelling argument. This man is making the best decision he can. He hopes it's right, and because of that, he hopes that you will be with him. That was George H.W. Bush. That was George H.W. Bush. And he was a real gentleman. And because he had served as head of the CIA, he really knew what was going on in Russia, in China, in Europe, any place in the world. And it was comforting to have as President of the United States somebody like that. President Reagan was not always on top of all of those issues, not at all, but H.W. Bush was. But then he was defeated by a young governor from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, aided and abetted by his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I became very close with President Clinton and with Hillary. We were of the same party. It was easier for us to work together. I never could make up my mind who was smarter, Clinton or Carter, because both I thought had outstanding minds. I certainly think that President Clinton was the much better politician. That was not Carter's strong point. I remember the very first time that I met President Clinton. This was before he was president, and he was campaigning for. I was in Congress at the time, but at any event, I met him down in Chautauqua, and he was in Chautauqua, and we took a bus, the same bus together, back into a rally parking lot of Canisius College on Main and Delavan. And the difficulty was we were hours and hours late for that. And the reason is, on the way from Chautauqua to Buffalo, there were an awful lot of people lined up knowing that the bus was going to be going that way. And whenever he saw 6 people or more, he'd stop the bus. And he'd want to get out and not only shake their hands. I think we were about 3 hours late for the rally at Canisius College, but I can ask my wife and son about that because they were waiting for that period of time too. Was it about that long? It was a long time. Yeah. Okay, good. I became very close with President Clinton and Hillary Rodham Clinton. I almost don't know where to begin. There were so many stories that I could tell. But I was very pleased when President Clinton came to a rally in Buffalo, and this was even after I had left Congress. He said to the group, he said, I want everybody to know that I consider John LaFalce like a brother. That I was good because I tried to have a good relationship with him. There's one thing in particular that stands out in my mind. He had a rocky relationship with his wife. It was very, very good, very, very bad, somewhere in between. You never really knew. Well, he was in hot water with the House of Representatives, and that morning there was a meeting that was called of the Democratic members of Congress to hear from Hillary Rodham Clinton. And Hillary gave a talk, and the first thing she said when she talked to us, I want you all to know that I still love my husband very much. Wow. That started her defense of him. It so happened that late afternoon or early evening, we were having a get-together with President Clinton at the White House. And we were standing, it was cocktail time, and we were having drinks together. And I grabbed him by the hand and I said, Mr. President, I said, let's get away from the crowd here. I just want to tell you something. And so we did. We just walked over to a corner and I said, I want you to know that when your wife met with the Democratic members of the House this morning, she started off her comments by saying, I want you all to know I still love my husband very much. And he looked at me and he said, she said that. I said, yes, Mr. President. I thought it was important that you know it. So that was it. I think that helped create an unbelievable bond between the Clintons and myself, that I was the conveyor of such a message that they could build upon going forward. I was just the carrier of the message. I had nothing to do with the content, but the content was powerful enough that I think it had a good effect. And then I traveled a lot with both the president and Hillary. Went with them on some foreign trips. Met with different foreign presidents, etc. Was over at the White House a good many times. He was in office for 8 years, so we had a lot of dinners together, etc. And then Hillary ran for, I remember we had been meeting with President Zedillo in Mexico. And we were flying back. And Hillary walked back and sat with me and said, "Look, John, let's chat." You know. And I remember she asked me, "What do you think about my running for the New York State Senate seat? Do you think I should? Do you think I'd be welcome into New York State as its representative? Do you think I could win, et cetera, et cetera?" And I said, "Well," I remember my response. I said, "Hillary, that's a decision you are going to have to make. But I says, I think the primary consideration that you should have in your mind is two questions. What would my victory mean for my marriage? And the second question, what would my defeat mean for my marriage?" And of course, this was the assumption that the maintenance of the marriage was important to her. And I did not want to go there. I did not want to ask that question. I don't know if she thought about that at all, but that was the best advice I could give her. I thought that was the most important thing, you know, maintaining that marriage if she wanted to. And then, you know, I could see why a victory would have made it more difficult. And I could see where a loss could have made it more difficult too. More likely the difficulty would have come about with a victory, but who knows. At any event, she ran, she won, and she ran for president and she lost. So I think she would have made a very good president. I think she would have been certainly the best prepared person for the presidency, having been the First Lady for 8 years and been in the New York State, the United States Senate, represented New York for a great many years before that too. But that was not to be. And so I hope she's happy as a grandmother right now. Then George W. Bush, I also served with him. Now, he was different than his father, to be sure. He didn't have all the strengths that his father had, but he had some strengths that his father didn't have, too. He was a great people person. You know, he'd make you comfortable. You liked him right away. And so you wanted to work well with him. I also remember, too, we experienced September 11th while he was President of the United States. And I remember sitting in the House of Representatives a night or two after that when he gave a speech to the entirety of the Congress and therefore to the world too. And I just said to myself, this is a great speech. I don't know if anybody else could have given a speech as good as the one that George Bush, not H.W., but W. Bush, just delivered. Sometimes, you know, the man meets the moment and matches the moment. And I thought that W. Bush did on that occasion. Whenever I go over to the White House and see him, he says, he'd always greet me the same way, "Big John." I didn't know whether that was praising me or criticizing me for my character. Probably the latter. But in any event, those were the 6 presidents I served with. Did I miss any one of them?
No.
Oh, okay, good. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? They must be having liquor afterwards. Anxious guy. Yes, sir.
And John, I welcome the opportunity to say hello to you. Nice on this occasion. But considering, do I need that?
And what is your name, sir?
Marlon Salmon. I was one of your constituents.
City of Tonawanda?
City of Tonawanda.
Yes.
You have a good memory.
Yeah.
Or a bad one. I don't
Well,
know.
you were a famous attorney. Yeah.
Thank you. This considering your knowledge of President Carter and the intimacy that you had with him, what do you think he would say on this occasion of our situation in America as to what we should be thinking of in reference to world politics, where we ought to be standing? If you have a concept of what he might think, that would be helpful, I think, because we need all the advice we can get right now. Thank you.
But first I have to say, in all candor, I don't have the vaguest idea. However, I suspect he was concerned with human rights more than any other issue. Human rights, not just domestically, but especially abroad. I remember meeting with him on the subject of human rights after a few trips that I had taken to different places in the world. And other members came with me to the White House. He always wanted us to give him a briefing. He wanted us to give him our perspective, what had we learned, which he was unique in that respect as a president. Now, what would he think today? Well, I don't know. I do remember he was president when we reestablished relations with the People's Republic of China. You know, I don't know that we would have been able to reestablish those relations had he not been president. Now I have special feelings for that because I was one of his representatives to go over to Beijing, China on January 1st, 1979, when we celebrated the ceremonies reestablishing our relationship. And I was one of the representatives of the president at that time. And the chief representative, of course, was the ambassador from the United States, who was the former president of the UAW. Oh, his name's not coming to my mind right now, because we're going back a few years. But I remember meeting too with Deng Xiaoping, who was the leader of China at that time, and then being with Deng Xiaoping when we hosted him in the United States of America. And it is imperative, and Carter knew this, you know, what's the best way to defeat an enemy, whether it is a person or a country? You make him your friend. If you make him a friend, you've defeated your enemy. And that is what we needed to do with China. That's what we need to do with anybody with which we have an adversarial relationship. You know, look for a means of mending that relationship and make it a more friendly one, and not a totally friendly one. I thought Carter was good at that. Very good. Next question. Yes.
How do you feel as a former member of Congress about the debt ceiling that they're fighting about right now? Are we about to go into default, or do you think they're going to iron it out? And can we do something long-term so this doesn't happen every 6 or 8 years?
Well, you can eliminate the requirement for a debt ceiling. And I don't know whether that would be good or bad. The proof would be in the pudding. I tend to think that it's nice to have this target to keep it under control. If you didn't have it, I'm just afraid there could be terrible excesses, terrible build-up of debt. The temptation would be, oh, I want this, let's spend for it. When somebody, You know, you've got 535 members of Congress, each of them wants something, you know, and if you don't have some type of a constraint, now, can the constraints be changed? Yeah, but not that readily, not that easily. So, and the question then is too is, well, what should that debt ceiling be? And that's a separate issue. And you know, it's the same as in your household. You know, should we borrow money? Should we take a mortgage out on the house? Well, yeah, but how much? You know, well, we have to be able to pay it off. And so we have to be careful that we don't take too much of a mortgage. And then, of course, you know, should we take a loan out for a car, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a question of balance, whether it's for a family or a government. You know, you have to find the right balance. But and if push comes to shove, you'll always find the votes to lift the debt ceiling, but you probably will be spending a lot less with that debt ceiling than you would have if it didn't exist. So those are my thoughts. And I could well be wrong. I know the position I take. Who else might have a question?
One last question?
Okay, the gentleman.
Is it true that China holds most of our debt?
Well,
Is it a true fact that China is the one that we owe the money to? They hold our debt, is that correct?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect that it is, but I cannot either affirm or deny that.
Good answer.
May I just simply say something? I've served your name, seen your name through the years. I am delighted to have met you today and your recollections of the presidents. We thank you for joining us at Fox Run.
Aren't you a sweetheart? Thank you.
Ilona did the thank you for me, actually. All right, Barb. John, with all due respect, I think your presentation was even better without those pictures. It was like an intimate talk of the life events of a marvelous man right in our own living room. Thank you so much. And one more.
And I get to say, I think you're probably one of the best speakers we've ever had here. So come back again. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.